Good morning and welcome to all attendees to this webinar today on preparing for the implementation of the South African Wholesale Electricity Market known as SAWEM, S-A-W-E-M. My name is Chris Yelland. I'm the Managing Director at EE Business Intelligence, and I'll be your host at this webinar, signed in from Johannesburg. Welcome also to our presenters, who will be introduced to you in due course. I will share a link with you now in the Zoom chat facility where you can download the presenter biographies. So please take a look at the Zoom chat and click on the link to open the webinar, to open the document. And welcome to you, the attendees, for your interest and participation. This webinar is hosted by EE Business Intelligence. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the National Transmission Company of South Africa, NTCSA, the Solar Group, Cresco, the NOAA Group, Weber Wenzel, and Bredesen Consulting for their valued support for this webinar and for the great work they do in this field. Over 2,400 delegates have registered to attend this webinar to hear what the presenters have to say on the subject. And I must tell you that this is a record for us. Today is our biggest webinar to date. So this attests to the relevance of the subject matter being covered, as well as the stature of the presenters. So may I thank the presenters up front for their participation and for the time and effort that they've put in. Please do note that this webinar is being recorded, and links to view the webinar on demand and to download all the presentations will be made available tomorrow morning to all those who registered to attend. I'll be sending this by email, and I'll also be sharing it publicly. Colleagues, South Africa stands on the brink of a major electricity market reform with a planned launch of the South African Wholesale Electricity Market, which was initially scheduled to go live on the 1st of April 2026, and we look forward to hearing from Keith Bowen as to the latest situation in this regard. This pivotal shift towards a competitive, transparent, and independent electricity trading platform offers both challenges and opportunities for generators, licensed traders, large industrial users, and mining operations. This EE Business Intelligence webinar brings together key experts and stakeholders to unpack the SAWEM roadmap, regulatory and technical milestones, and the operational challenges required for market readiness. Central to the discussion will be the importance of accurate energy forecasting, robust metering and reporting systems, and preparedness for balancing market obligations. The webinar will also explore how flexible demand and dispatchable generation can unlock new revenue streams under SAWEM. With growing shares of variable renewable generation, the ability to respond dynamically to market signals, whether through load shifting, demand response, or virtual power plants, will be critical for competitiveness and system stability. Participants will gain insight into the practical steps required to prepare for the participation in SAWEM, including IT systems integration, energy market literacy, contracting strategies, and regulatory compliance. Join us to engage with thought leaders and market pioneers at the front line of South Africa's energy transition and prepare your organization for the realities of a liberalized electricity market. So the program for the day has been widely circulated, but a link to download the program will be shared again here now on the Zoom chat facility. So again, please take a look at this program. It has been shared with you before, but it's available to you now. So to start off with, Keith Bowen of the NTCSA will give an opening address to contextualize the webinar and its place in the electricity market reform that is underway and where things are right now. Then 4 presenters will each give 20-minute presentations, and in between we'll have a 10-minute comfort break. Thereafter, Hans-Arald Bredesen of Bredesen Consulting will wrap up with some insights of his own as one of the key persons involved with the design of the electricity market in South Africa and the development of the market code. After this, we've set aside about 30 minutes for our presenters to answer just some of your questions in an open discussion and Q&A session. While the presentation is in progress, please do send your questions on the Zoom Q&A text facility. You may also put up your hands to ask questions verbally during the Q&A session. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our opening keynote speaker, that is Keith Bowen at the NTCSA. Keith is a power systems economist and senior manager market operator at the National Transmission Company of South Africa. He has extensive experience in energy economics and planning in the power sector, and is responsible for developing wholesale pricing mechanisms, supporting internal transfers within the vertically integrated utility, and payments to independent power producers. With the restructuring of Eskom, he's involved in developing future market mechanisms and trading arrangements between the transmission subsidiary and other industry participants. Keith has a bachelor's degree in computer science and economics and a master's degree in economics from Wits University. So with that, it is over to you, Keith.
Thanks very much, Chris, and good morning, everybody. And yeah, to start off with, when we talk about the South African wholesale electricity market, we are still aiming for the 1st of April as our launch date, the commencement date for the market. But as I go through the discussion, we'll see that there's still a number of risks and challenges to meet that date. But to start off with, when we talk about the competitive market, the reality is that the competitive market's already here. We're seeing a lot of development taking place through bilateral contracting between different market participants, through generators, traders, off-takers, through the wheeling program, and being able to communicate with one another and trade with one another on a significant basis. Historically, the wheeling framework has been in place since 2008, and the amount of trade was always very small. There was a lot of industrial users who had cogeneration, were able to trade. But essentially, since the president lifted the threshold for licensing 2 years ago, we've seen that starting to develop quite extensively. I think at the moment we're at just over 600 megawatts of licensed or registered generators wheeling directly to customers. A little bit of traders involved in the process as well, but that is growing at an incredible rate. What's important about that, though, is that while the competition is there and it's effective, it also means that there are impacts on the system. That some buyers and sellers dealing with bilaterals are able to arrange with one another directly, but it means that somebody is taking care of the balancing, and that's effectively the system operator in the NTCSA, who takes on a lot of the complication of trying to predict what the demand is going to look like on a day-ahead basis, what supplies needs to be produced for that, but not really knowing to a very effective extent what's happening outside what we control. And obviously, wheeling is part of that we now, as I said, have 600 megawatts of wheeling, but also the growing amount of embedded generation. The latest figures that the system operator has put together is almost 7,500 megawatts of generation taking place behind the meter. So it's not generation that we understand or are able to measure on a daily basis, but we have to analyze the change in behavior, the change in consumption, to see what's happening behind the meter. And that's quite a significant level of development. And that means that as this grows, both wheeling and behind the meter activities, the system operator's job gets a lot harder. So what we've proposed as part of the South African wholesale electricity market is that we introduce a new channel for trading. One, to make trading more short-term, to make it more efficient in terms that buyers and sellers can find each other on a short-term basis, be able to trade any excess energy that they might have, or meet demand shortages where they don't have enough generation capacity, and that the market really takes off to deal with that, both on a day-ahead, intraday, and then also in real time through the balancing mechanism. But importantly, it also means that those trades that are taking place bilaterally also need to start taking accountability of the balancing around their production and consumption. So we expect then that we develop what we call balanced responsible parties, as envisaged in the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act, which then means that those participants need to tell us what they're going to be doing on a day-ahead basis, so that the system operators and the market operator are able to dispatch taking that as a given and then dealing with the consequence when that is not actually produced, or there might even be excesses coming from those generators or traders. But the idea then is that by having balanced responsibility as a particular focus and essentially a need on the grid, we're able to run the market, and the system operator is able to meet demand through the day ahead and intraday and in the balancing mechanism for the remainder. But how are we doing in terms of developing towards this 1st of April? So over the last few months, we've had a fair amount of progress in terms of the steps being taken to get ready for this. Firstly, the market operator license has now been submitted through to NERSA. We've advertised that in the newspapers. NERSA has also advertised and put the application on the website. And now we're going through the process, culminating in the public hearings on the 30th of September, which NERSA will be running around the market operator license. And hopefully, all things being equal, we should be able to see that license being issued by mid-November. So that's quite a bit of progress that was made, a lot of work being done both by NERSA and by the NTCSA to try and get that over the line. Secondly, on the market code, we now are having our hopefully final industry workshop scheduled in 2 days' time on the 11th of September to go through what has changed since the first version that we launched in April last year. What is the big impacts coming from what participants have given us in terms of comments, as well as the due diligence that we ran through ENS as who were supporting us with the help from NECOM to go and look at what were the impacts on the market code from the ERA, what is the market code impact, and making sure that we're aligned in terms of what we've put into the code and what's workable under the current legal framework. So that also led to quite a few changes, specifically on governance, dispute resolution, but also in some of the definitions that we've used in the terms in the market code. We then look at the wholesale tariff. So one of the important facets that needs to be in place before the market starts is to have a proper wholesale tariff regime in place that covers a lot of the components that we've seen arising under the retail tariff plan, that these would also be implemented in the wholesale tariff, including legacy charges, generation capacity charges, potentially also a subsidy charge to deal with the subsidy requirements in various municipalities, as well as Eskom distribution, that those would all be facets of the wholesale tariff that we would like to see in place. The document has been workshopped through the NECOM process, and hopefully we'll be submitting to NERSA relatively soon for them to start a public consultation on that. The additional work then that we're doing internally under the NTCSA is on the systems development. We've recruited additional resources to help us to get us over the line in terms of the work that needs to be done. We are recruiting additional just to make sure that we've got enough people to back up and to support that development. And so we've also then finished our gap analysis as to what's required in terms of the differences from what we have in place. I have mentioned it before many times that we've been doing a lot of this work in preparation within Eskom, some of it for over 20 years, some of it relatively recently, adding to the work that we've done historically to include day ahead and intraday and balancing. And so we've then looked at what is still required in terms of us being ready for the 1st of April. So what are the things that are still outstanding? Well, obviously the market operator license, we still have to go through that process and hopefully have it awarded in time. Then it's the market code. We still have not formally submitted the market code to NERSA, and we hope to do so by the end of the month. But NERSA has also been very clear that there is a requirement that they have to license us first before they can officially process the market code. So there would be a bit of a delay, so we then only once the license is issued with the processing and the official mechanism to deal with the market code kick off. And that could take a good number of months. So we're definitely looking till at least January, if not February, before there's a decision, at least on the market code. In terms of the wholesale tariff, obviously, as I said, we've got a document that we would like to submit to NERSA. NERSA then has to process that and also have public hearings, workshops, look at how it wants the wholesale tariff to work. And even following that, we would then have to make an application in terms of what the tariff would look like, at least from the NTCSA's perspective, putting in an application and then NERSA making a decision based on that application and the rules that they have approved in place. So that also puts quite a heavy timeline for that. And as I've said many times, I mean, we are putting a lot of pressure on NERSA, and a lot of it not really fair kind of pressure on them. So we just got to deal with what are the consequences then if that all sort of piles up and takes a lot longer than what was expected. And in terms of the system development, as mentioned, we've completed a gap analysis, and we're focusing really in two phases for the system development. One is work around the portal, which would then allow offering and bidding into the market, and the scheduling, and then the information coming back to the participants, so that we can at least, hopefully by November, have something in place that people can test. So that we have mechanisms that you can see when bids and offers are put through the system, how we would then use that and the results being provided. The second phase is then around our integration into the financial systems, as well potentially into the banking systems, to make sure that we are picking up information and providing information in reverse around the finances, invoicing, and all of that, which needs to be in place by the end of March. But I think the one kind of critical element that I haven't touched on yet is the concept of the vesting contracts. So as we have mentioned in many of the previous workshops and in our market school work that we're doing at the moment, the vesting contracts is a critical element of the launch of the market, because it deals with the transition and how we move from an environment of regular sort of tariffs and predictable tariffs over a period of years to having an environment where the prices are determined daily, day ahead, on an hourly basis, with a huge amount of volatility, and what that means for consumers, what it means for participants. Obviously, we expect hedging to develop along the way, but initially, to protect Eskom generation and the licensed distributors from market volatility, that there would be these vesting contracts. And as I've said many times over, the idea is also the vesting contracts protects the market from the market dominance that could be exerted by Eskom generation and Eskom distribution. So it works in both ways to try and bridge the gap from where we are now to where we need to be in a competitive environment, but also ensuring that the sustainability of at least Eskom generation and distribution is not compromised as we move into the environment that we need to be. So that still quite a lot of work needs to be done on the vesting contracts. We have work being done under NECOM to kind of come up with a vesting contract paper, to also take that through NERSA as a way for us to bring in public comment, but also to finalize those contracts and have them agreed across between the parties, and also get NERSA's blessing. Is going to be a lot of work over the next 6 months to have those ready. So yes, it's a lot of pressure there for the 1st of April. There is a possibility we may not be ready, but we're looking at what is the minimum that we do need to have in place. So at least if we're not fully there, that we increase the transparency, that the current arrangements that we have with Eskom generation, distribution, and the NTCSA at least become more transparent, and that the pricing is seen on a daily basis, and that sort of we kind of move forward in terms of the transparency, if not the context of what's actually happening in terms of the trading. But we will then be trying to make sure that we catch up and have that ready within 6 months if we don't make the 1st of April. Obviously, we're still targeting that because we don't want to take the wheel off the foot off the accelerator. We want to keep this car on the road, but we do have to be aware that we're putting a lot of pressure on the regulator, which again, it really is an issue that they have to process the stuff timeously, but also be considerate so that it's not opening them up to review after the fact if they rush through the process. I think the one thing I didn't talk about was the market school. So we have kicked off with the market school. It's been incredibly interesting and exciting from our perspective, and hopefully from the participants' perspective, where every month we've been running a 3-day workshop, and we are looking like we're going to have to double that up because it's been seriously oversubscribed. And the team is struggling to always find space for us to be able to get everybody in. But we hope to be able to get more of those on the road so that come 1st of April, we do at least have a lot more people trained up into what the market means and how to participate in that market. But yeah, so that's overall where we are and where we're heading towards. And hopefully we will be putting up sort of a bit of a dashboard on the NTCSA website so that you're able to see the progress and kind of get more of a visibility as to where we are relative to the 1st of April. That's pretty much it from me. Thanks, Chris.
Well, thank you, Keith, for that very informative update as to where things are. We thank you for managing this process, for putting up with the huge pressure involved, and for handling this in such a open and transparent and participative way. And I hope that this webinar adds to that transparency. So it's been a great pleasure having you as our opening keynote presenter today, and all the best in the future launch of the wholesale electricity market for South Africa. We really are excited about this development.
Thanks,
So
Chris.
with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to introduce our first actual presenter as opposed to the opening keynote speaker, and that is Bronwyn Tim from Solar Group. Bronwyn has over 20 years experience in business development, strategy implementation, stakeholder management, and design thinking across a variety of sectors, including renewable energy, consumer goods, pensions, and unclaimed benefits, amongst others. Her role at Solar Group as the business development manager involves negotiating and selling large-scale utility wheeling contracts to private sector organizations via PPAs, power purchase agreements. Shorter and more flexible power purchase agreements have provided opportunities for small to medium-sized businesses to take advantage of wheeled power. Bronwyn is also preparing Solar for their involvement in both virtual wheeling and participation and the wholesale electricity market, and has recently completed training on market participation at the SAWEM school, which Keith referred to above. So with that, welcome to Bronwyn, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Keith. And it's always a hard job to follow Keith Bowen on the SAWEM school. So I'm assuming you can all see my screen. Thank you very much, Chris, for inviting us to participate. I'll be covering the following topics: a brief introduction of who Solar Group is. Chris has then asked us to cover the developer and IPP view of SAWEM, and I'll be going through 4 key points. The main points being what is a balanced responsible party and who will be a balanced responsible party. Then the cost implications and the resource capabilities of being a BRP. IPPs and developers may then elect to be market participants in SAWEM, and what are the opportunities for doing that. And then finally, the risks associated with those market participations. I'll conclude with some key takeaways. So for those of you who don't know who Solar Group is, we're a vertically integrated clean energy company, fully South African, and have been in the clean energy space since 2008, which I hear is what Keith Bowen says the trading has been around, which is quite a coincidence. So as a vertically integrated clean energy company, Solar starts the value chain with our project development capabilities, and we've developed nearly 3 gigawatts of solar assets over that time. We've also used our project finance capabilities to raise over 10 billion rand worth of assets that are owned by Solar. Our engineering and design team are very experienced in both rooftop solar as well as large-scale utility wheeling projects. And you can see that we have either built or have in construction 700 megawatts of power. I heard from Keith that there's around 600 megawatts of wheeling, and solar is currently around 350 megawatts of that private scale wheeling, including to clients such as Tronox, Amazon, AB InBev, and now Vodacom on our project Springbok. That's our latest project that reached COD in the last week, which we're very proud of. And then finally, our operations and maintenance team. They have over 500 megawatts of assets in operation, which has resulted in us being able to deliver over 1 billion kilowatt hours of power into the grid, which is roughly equivalent to powering Bloemfontein for a whole year, or to planting 45 million trees. As a result of this experience and being pioneers in short-term PPAs and virtual wheeling, we believe that we've got first-hand insight into the operational, regulatory, and commercial shifts that SAWEM bring. So the four key points around being a developer and an IPP in SAWEM is that generators over 10 megawatts will be required to be balanced responsible parties with prerequisites for forecasting on a day-ahead basis, which is what Keith has already mentioned. These BRPs are going to have cost implications for being out of balance, which will require us to have internal resource capabilities, both understood, enhanced, and potentially built. IPPs may choose to be market participants when SAWEM launches, which will allow us to trade ahead and to proactively manage being out of balance. Finally, there are risks to consider before becoming a market participant, which is the last point that I'll cover in my presentation. So Keith has already explained what a balanced responsible party is, as we will be held responsible for adhering to our forecasted supply or demand in the day-ahead market, and this will allow the system operator to maintain balance in the system. As a result of being required to be balanced responsible parties, we as IPPs will need to build internal resource capabilities. The first and most important being accurate day-ahead forecasting, as well as bidding capabilities. This includes the ability to take weather forecasting for renewable energy businesses like ourselves, to then translate that into generation forecasting, which we will then bid into the market. A second key capability to have as an IPP are advanced metering systems, as well as real-time monitoring of our generation. This includes anything from SCADA systems to telecommunication systems, as well as meters that meet ESCOM requirements. And finally, potentially a new capability within IPPs is balance accounting and settlement capabilities, which I'll cover later. So what are the cost implications of being out of balance? There will be penalties or rewards, which will depend on whether an IPP or a generator has performed the actual versus forecasted generation. And currently there is envisaged to be a 5% tolerance band for being over or under that forecasted performance. If an IPP delivers more than forecasted, it means that the market operator will buy that power from the IPP at a system marginal price, which may result in reduced profit. If an IPP delivers less than forecasted, it will mean that that IPP must buy the shortfall from the market operator at a system marginal price, which may result in financial loss. In addition to the forecasting and capabilities that an IPP will need to build as a BRP, BRPs will also need to post collateral or credit cover. This is to allow for the market operator to call on the imbalance payments that an IPP would need as part of their balance responsibility. This will include transaction clearing accounts, as well as trade clearing accounts and collateral reserves. A key agreement that needs to be put in place, which is part of the market code and the ERA, and what NERSA is approving with the National Transmission Company of South Africa, are the balance agreements. These will be signed between the BRP and the market operator. I mentioned previously that balance accounting and settlement are things that IPPs may not necessarily have in place, and therefore those systems may need to be built or bought, along with trading systems to allow BRPs to bid into the market. And finally, there are dispute processes within the market code, which IPPs have access to, and it will be a key capability to understand those dispute processes so that they can implement them if required when the SAWEM is launched. The exciting thing about the launch of the SAWEM is that IPPs may actually choose to also be market participants. What this will allow us to do is to directly participate in the day-ahead and future intraday markets, which will give us the ability to proactively manage being out of balance. There are key requirements of being market participants, A BRP does not have to be a market participant, but if they do choose to be a market participant, they will then need to sign the market participant agreement and follow the rules and the requirements of being a market participant. The third opportunity for IPPs as being a market participant is that they will be able to bid in flexible products such as battery energy storage to unlock new revenue streams and to proactively manage their generation actuals versus forecast. That's one of the reasons why Solar is investing heavily in PV plus battery storage systems in all of their projects going forward. And finally, as Keith already mentioned, markets make pricing transparent. And by having transparent pricing, we'll have much more accurate signals to guide our investment as IPPs and developers in renewable and storage capacity for the South African energy market. To end off the market participant risks, there are opportunities, as I mentioned, but being a market participant in SAWEM will bring financial exposure to real-time price movements. If this is not a capability that's already part of an IPP, this is one of the key risks to understand and measure, and also to build the capability to forecast pricing and to understand the implications of the financial exposure to those price movements. As with the BRP, who have credit collateral and trade clearing accounts, market participants also have the same credit requirements and potentially more onerous ones, which will mean that they will also have to comply with the market participant operational and credit requirements. Market participation means trading, and this will require building in-house trading capabilities, which I'm sure Andrew will go through later on in his presentation. And should an IPP or a developer choose to be a trader, they will need to build trading systems, as I said, forecasting and scenario systems. And finally, the management of these risks will be through risk governance frameworks. This will include regulatory risks, hedging risks, accurate forecasting and analysis, and these can all be managed through a framework of risk governance. So my last slide is on the key takeaways. The most important one for IPPs and generators and all participants actually is to build the internal capability within your organization. We've already mentioned the SAWEM school, which I can highly recommend. Keith, I think it would be a good idea to add a few more sessions this year. The SAWEM school, as well as the market code, is a great place to learn about the internal capability and especially the BRP requirements. The second takeaway is forecasting and scheduling readiness. The cost implications of being out of balance are a key risk to BRPs, and therefore investment in metering, data systems, and forecasting generation capability, especially in the renewable space, where weather forecasts change on a daily basis, will be a key criteria and success factor for BRPs. And finally, the legal and contractual alignment that will have to happen for BRPs, both in their bilateral PPAs as well as in their credit and collateral arrangements. So that's my presentation done. Over to you, Chris.
And thank you, Bronwyn, for really giving us insight, from an IPP perspective, from a generator perspective, as to what needs to be done to prepare for this SAWEM, this wholesale electricity market. And the point that you've made so well, and with your own participation at the SAWEM school, is that this is an important preparatory step to be properly trained and informed on how to participate. And it's great to see that there's been a very positive response to the SAWEM school. And I think you've made it clear that this is an important thing that participants should actually undergo. So with that, thank you very much. And we're going to now move on to our second presenter, who is Olga Shukova from Cresco. So Olga is an associate director at Cresco, where she provides strategic, financial, and transactional advisory services to large energy-intensive users, IPPs, and traders. With more than 15 years' experience in power and mining, Olga has been involved in multiple capital-intensive projects spanning conventional and renewable energy, PGM, that's platinum group metal mining, petrochemical plant construction, and public-private partnerships in oil and gas and related infrastructure. Recently, Olga has been focusing on South African energy mix development, national energy balance modeling, and load shedding analysis. Finally, Olga has been advising large energy consumers and traders on the South African wholesale electricity market design and operations, exploring the possible impacts the newly developed market would have on their operations and strategy. So I think Olga has been going to be talking mainly from the perspective of large energy intensive users and mining companies for which the company has been involved extensively. So with that, over to you, Olga. We're looking forward to hearing your presentation, which we can see perfectly. Over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. I was hoping to take you through the principles of electricity pricing under SAWEM and, more importantly, leading to SAWEM. The changes, as Keith alluded to in his presentation, are already taking place in electricity tariff space, and thus the considerations and the impact that these changes have on the companies and their financial standing need to be assessed already today. Obviously, the changes that are currently unfolding are really just the tip of the iceberg. There's further changes that we can expect to take place in that space. So obviously, it is a space to observe and note. So as everyone is very well aware, the energy sector in South Africa has been in transition for many years now. It's not just this year or last year that we have seen changes. It has really been in the making for many, many years. Obviously, the focus is shifting. So from Cresco's perspective, we work a lot with private off-takers, large energy-intensive users, IPPs, aggregators, and funders. And we see, obviously, the shift in focus over the years. Initially, the clients have been asking us to assist them with strategy formulation, decarbonization, energy security. Later, that evolved into the actual procurement of renewable energy. The market was very much also in transition, so transitioning from bilateral type of deals. Today, we're seeing a shift towards multilateral structures. And obviously, that transition, that market evolution is also going to continue with the goal to getting to the fully liberalized energy markets in the near future. Today, focusing on this year, the key focus areas, at least from the clients of Cresco perspective, have been very much on the tariff restructuring, tariff plan adjustments, MYPD6, forecasting of the electricity pricing today in today's market, but also in SAWEM, focusing very much on the demand and supply analysis and load shedding forecasting, really taking, having a more detailed look how the technologies are evolving within the energy mix, because all of that ultimately will present opportunities and also risks that the companies would need to take care of and mitigate. In terms of Cresco's assistance and the help that we provide to our clients, so as mentioned, the key focus areas at the moment are very much on the tariff forecasting and electricity price forecasting. And that relates both to the regulated tariff forecasting and unregulated tariff forecasting. Energy mix development, we do a lot of scenario analysis and impact analysis of this energy transition that we are experiencing. ESCOM retail tariff plan, all the changes that have already been approved by NERSA earlier this year, and the further possible tariff adjustments. We have Shirley Salvoldi on our team, who has been helping us a lot, trying to unpack the changes that are unfolding in that space for our clients. SAWEM in itself has certain requirements in terms of tariff unbundling. As Keith mentioned, and there is this price transparency that is required for SAWEM to operate smoothly. We need to have clear price signals, and for that, the tariff structure needs to be prepared. And this is the process that we're already seeing unfolding. So obviously, SAWEM operations in itself has been a great focus for our clients, balancing that Bronwyn has explained in quite a lot of detail. Day-ahead price forecasting, this is something that we also start building our internal capability in. Other revenue opportunities that will present themselves within SAWEM, like, for example, ancillary services. And then obviously that leads to SAWEM strategy development. So this is the type of assistance that we provide to our clients. And last but not least, obviously the value of carbon and how this space is evolving with RECs and REAP environmental attributes, et cetera, et cetera. As you can see, SAWEM obviously and the market and the energy market reform are obviously catalysts for significant change also in other sectors of the industry, and thus we need to obviously consider all of it together and consider the impact that would have on the company and for the financial standing of the company. So just maybe some basics on price setting mechanisms and the principles in SAWEM. I do not want to spend too much time on this because to me, this is more like a context to what I would actually like to discuss today. But I think this context is very important to understand, what will be driving price setting within SAWEM. So as per the market code, the day-ahead energy market, in the day-ahead energy markets, clearing price and volumes will be based on the merit order curve. So the merit order is a sequence in which the power generation is basically being used to meet the demand. Ultimately, the merit order is based on the marginal costs, and that is a very important concept that we need to note. Marginal costs being the variable costs required to produce an additional unit of electricity. Those will be the costs that will be used to set the price, the wholesale energy price within SAWEM. Wholesale energy price will be determined as an intersect between the supply and the demand curves. So the market operator will receive offers and bids from the generators and the consumers in the day-ahead market. The market operator will then use those offers and bids to build the demand and the supply curves, and the intersect of those will basically determine the market trading volume, and out of that, the day-ahead price or the system marginal price, as it is being called in the market code, will be established. What is important to consider is that the SAWEM will operate under a uniform pricing system, which means that the wholesale energy price or the system marginal price that will be established out of the marginal generator needed to meet the demand will be the single price being paid to all the generators dispatching in that hour. So regardless of the cost of the marginal cost of each individual generating unit, the price that will be paid to them will be the S&P price. What is also important to understand is that it will be the unconstrained energy schedule that will be considered when setting the price. And and the generators will be reimbursed for the lost opportunity once the constraints are being implemented. So should they be asked to step back and not dispatch for any given hour, they will be reimbursed for this lost opportunity. And the final note to make is on the inframarginal rent. So going back to this concept of uniform pricing, the wholesale energy price will be established by, as I mentioned, by that last marginal generator that it will be required to meet the demand in any hour of the trading day. And the difference between that market price and the cost of generation is what is called the inframarginal rent. And that is a very important concept and is in terms of the recovery of the fixed costs, particularly for the inflexible generators who will not be getting any capacity payments. The inframarginal rents need to be large enough for them to ensure that sufficient return on their investment is there to recover their fixed costs, but also to earn profits. Another very important concept, and we have already touched on it, is the inflexible trading unit. So S&P price will be established based on the costing provided by the flexible generators. Inflexible generators will be disregarded when setting the S&P price. So from that perspective, flexible generation becomes an important consideration also from the forecasting perspective. Considering the energy mix development in South Africa, that becomes a critical consideration when analyzing SAWEM and when forecasting the future wholesale energy price. Your energy mix development will be driving your composition of the generation and basically the balance between the generation and demand. When will we have sufficient renewable energy generation to meet the demand in any specific hour? When will coal start losing its market power and really start stepping down in terms of supplying energy to the consumers? Considering the current state of affairs and the current position of coal, it is fairly safe to assume that for the foreseeable future, and I guess it is debatable for how long, a marginal coal plant will be setting the price along with OCGTs within SAWEM. Of course, there are numerous disclaimers that we can make on that point, but ultimately, as I say, we can relatively safely assume that for the near future. What that means is that it will be the marginal cost of either a coal plant or an OCGT setting the wholesale energy price within SAWEM. And that is an important consideration that I would like you to note, because that is something that we will touch upon in later slides and discuss in greater detail. So in terms of the energy mix development, Cresco has been very busy in that space. We have developed our own energy balance, national energy balance model that we have been using for a number of years now, building projections of the energy mix development and load shedding forecasting. We do make updates to the model and to our projections on a regular basis, depending on the developments that are taking place within the industry. Just recently, we have done another update. As you can see, there are certain changes that are taking place in that space. Firstly, of course, there has been a change in the decommissioning plan. It was approved by Eskom board and then the cabinet that coal decommissioning will be delayed at least until 2030. So that gives us a little bit more breathing space in terms of new capacity rollout. However, even in that space, we're experiencing some delays, which has also been taken into consideration when updating our current forecasts. So renewable energy rollout has been unfortunately delayed. That has been due to the different challenges that IPPs are facing in terms of the, for example, EPC constraints, and that also largely relates to the transmission grid unavailability and capacity scarcity. So, there has been, this delay has been taken into account. We have seen an increased demand for battery storage. So BESS capacity rollout was actually advanced, particularly by the private market. And that also has a lot to do with the current pricing of battery storage and the decreased capex and thus improved value proposition of BESS. And then finally, large-scale gas-fired generation. Obviously, there is a lot of debate around that capacity. It's important capacity from the energy mix perspective of South Africa because it represents a mid-merit type of generation and potentially fits better to replace the coal capacity that needs to be decommissioned. And so from that perspective, IRP, for example, has been showing quite an aggressive rollout of gas generation, Eskom Sasol and other press releases, showing us that potentially there will be gas. However, we within Cresco, we have our doubts that this is really possible, and thus we still believe that the gas rollout will not commence before 2030. This is just a quick snapshot on the energy mix in 2030. You can see that there is a lot more renewable energy generators being already present within the energy grid. BESS is already, the capacity of BESS is also already quite significant according to our projections. And, the evening peak is when BESS is heavily utilized and dispatched. In terms of renewable energy penetration, you can see that on average, it's 25%. We expect it to be 25% on average in 2030, with maximum renewable energy penetration reaching 39% in the afternoon hours. So in terms of this really just speaks to the value proposition of BESS and other flexible generators within SAWEM, but also today in terms of the energy grid, future energy grid development. You can see that there is a stronger case for BESS and other flexible generators. And what is also important to note is the shift in time of use and the hours when we actually start experiencing problems. Historically, it has been the evening and the morning hours, but as we transition to this new grid, we see the problematic hours really shifting into the nighttime, and obviously that will also be used when structuring the tariff, right? So all the changes that I have alluded to in terms of the tariff structure, obviously that also will be taken into account. The grid and the grid composition will drive those changes as well. And last but not least, speaking of BESS as well, obviously, and that is something we have seen, for example, happening just recently in Spain and Portugal. Cresco actually has written recently an article on the topic. The renewable energy and the grid that dominated, or with a large share of renewable energy, has its own problems in terms of balancing. So from that perspective, grid management and balancing of power will become increasingly complex, extending beyond just matching real-time supply and demand. And that is something that will pose challenges to the system operator, but also the opportunities for the market participants in terms of providing ancillary services, grid stability, and resilience with flexible generation and battery storage. So going back to the actual topic of today's discussion, the pricing, with MYPD 6, it was not just merely the approval of the percentage increase. This year, already for financial year 2026, which commenced in April 25, we have seen structural changes being implemented, firstly approved by NERSA and then implemented as part of the MYPD 6 submission. So the changes that were implemented include the changes to the time of use periods and ratios, unbundling of the energy charge into 3 components: the active energy time of use charge, fixed generation capacity charge, and the legacy charge. and then the removal of affordability charge from the WEPS credit. These are the changes that change the composition. Well, firstly, they reduce the WEPS credits, and then they change also. These are the structural changes that lead to the difference between the fixed and the variable component of the electricity price. The actual impact is to be assessed by each customer separately. That will very much depend on the generation profile and the demand profile of each individual customer. So that needs to be assessed separately. And this is the work that Cresco has been providing to the clients. But obviously, one thing that we do note is that the savings, unfortunately, take the hit as the WEPS credit goes down. As the WEPS credits go down, the savings is what is basically taking the toll and are decreasing. Unfortunately, this process we expect that to continue. We expect, as you can see, Cresco has developed its own view of further RTP changes that could potentially, be done. And most of these changes actually lead to that fixed component just becoming larger and ultimately increasing. So what we're seeing is that the variable component is going down, the fixed component is going up, and that obviously impacts the savings potential and generally the bankability and the interest in the wheeling projects. So that is Cresco is also busy forecasting the WEPS rate. So as you can see, I've provided you with some data points on the differences between, what WEPS rate we are forecasting in terms of the approved tariff structure by NERSA, and how that would evolve further if we assume all the changes that Cresco has taken into account. And that obviously leads us to the discussion that is currently unfolding within the industry, and that is how much of the fixed portion so Eskom is basically advocating that a larger proportion of their costs should be treated as fixed costs and a smaller proportion should be treated as variable costs. They go as far as claiming that up to 80% of their costs should be treated as fixed costs. What is important to understand in this debate is that will have a direct impact on the energy charge. Firstly, on the WEPS rate, as we have it today, but in the future, in the SAWEM market, that will have a direct impact on the S&P. As I mentioned before, it will be the variable cost that will drive the wholesale energy price within SAWEM. So the lower and as I mentioned before, it is safe to assume that for a number of years, it will either be a coal plant setting the price in certain hours of the day, or an OCGT setting the price in other hours of the day, in the peak hours most likely. So from that perspective, it is the variable costs of coal plants that will be setting the price in the S&P. And here at the bottom on your left, I basically did a very theoretical exercise based on MYPD numbers. As you can see, I was trying to very theoretically establish an average S&P price depending on the proportion of that fixed cost component. And as you can see, if we assume an 80% fixed, 20% variable split, the S&P price is sitting very low. And the opposite is true. Obviously, the price starts gradually increasing when you start shifting, start changing the component fixed versus variable. And obviously, that has that will have a very significant impact both from the IPP participation in SAWEM and the potential interest in the investors, for the investors to participate in capacity rollout. And Chris, I see I have just one last minute to really make my final conclusions. Obviously, all these changes are just important to consider. Fixed versus variable will be an important consideration, particularly, and the size of the generation capacity charge is an important consideration to take into account. particularly while we do not have a properly functioning capacity market. Once the capacity market is in place, that creates a level playing field that will encourage new investments and provide producers with reliable revenue streams. However, before we have a true capacity market, there is the risk of favoring the dominant player at the cost of discouraging participation of private participants as their payouts will be insufficient to really motivate that participation in the capacity rollouts. And finally, the financial market will also play a crucial role, providing the necessary hedging instruments and basically revenue stream, reliable revenue stream for the participants. Thank you. Chris, and over to you.
Thank you, Olga, for a very comprehensive presentation. A lot to think about, and I want to just assure the audience that all the presentations will be shared tomorrow morning at about 9 o'clock by email. So you will get these presentations. These are important takeaways in order for you to study these presentations in detail. It's very hard to digest some of these complexities in a short presentation, but be sure that you will get these takeaways afterwards, together with, of course, a video recording of the webinar. So thank you very much to Olga. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now exactly 11 o'clock. We're spot on time, and I'm going to call a 10-minute comfort break so that you can stretch your legs and get some coffee. And if I could ask you to be back here to restart at 10 minutes past 11, 10 past 11. So for now, we're on a comfort break until 10 past 11. We'll see you later. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is exactly 10 minutes past 11, and we're going to restart this webinar. And I hope you've had a chance to stretch your legs and are ready for some more really excellent presentations. It's my pleasure now to introduce to you our third presenter, and that is Andrew Taylor. Andrew is the head of trading and the co-founder at the NOAA Group, where he plays a pivotal role in navigating the renewable energy market's complex regulatory and commercial landscapes. With a keen understanding of legal frameworks and a strategic approach to energy trading, he ensures that NOAA's operations comply with regulations while maximizing value for all stakeholders. Andrew brings a wealth of experience in energy law and operations, enabling NOAA Group to navigate contractual negotiations, regulatory compliance, and risk management effectively. His leadership is instrumental in optimizing trading strategies, forging key strategic partnerships, and driving the company's growth trajectory in the renewable energy sector. And as I understand it, NOAA is a trader, a part of the Old Mutual Group, and a significant player in this field, and will be talking to us from the point of view of a trader. So with that, over to you, Andrew. We're looking forward to hearing from your presentation. Please share your presentation and put it in full screen mode, in presentation mode. Excellent. We can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Chris. Appreciate the introduction, and good day to all of the viewers on the webinar. Yeah, it's really a exciting moment in the development of the South African energy landscape to be able to be participating in at least shaping some of this discourse around energy. I think perhaps just by way of introduction, it's worth highlighting exactly what it is that NOAA does. So NOAA is an independent trader and an independent power producer, as well as an aggregator of renewable energy. And our role is to connect many different sources of renewable energy generation, be it wind, solar, or battery energy storage across the country. So diversified both by technology and by geography, and wheel this energy across to multiple customers on the front end of our trading platform. I think by bringing these generation sources together, we're able to shape a more reliable and flexible supply of renewable energy, which effectively means that customers don't just get electricity from a single generation facility, or rather they benefit from a whole portfolio that balances the risks and smooths out the variability in renewable energy generation. I think in addition, by procuring extremely large generation facilities, such as our recent financially closed Gauteng facility in the center of the country, which is 506 megawatts as a cluster and will be augmented by storage, NOAA procures at scale and is accordingly able to pass on some of these benefits and savings to our customers. In short, we seek to partner with our customers and take on the complexity that was made so evident by some of the Cresco presentations that customers are going to be faced with in time. And by becoming that renewable energy partner, we allow our customers to focus on their core business and ensure that their decarbonization and cost savings objectives are met in a smarter and more flexible way. What then is the SAWEM initiative? While undoubtedly a pivotal step in the energy reform roadmap, it is mechanisms like SAWEM that have allowed businesses like NOAA to become part of this liberalizing energy supply sector. With the lifting of private generation, as Keith mentioned, which permitted private sector generation to supply to customers directly, customers are now able to select a viable alternative to conventional options of procuring energy. And so as we enter this dawn of SAWEM, we stand at the cusp of the next phase of this legislative reform, one which was envisaged as far back as the white paper on energy reform back in 1998. And the wholesale market really exists to breathe life into the objects of the Electricity Regulation Act by ensuring that a competitive market is allowed to apply the market forces of supply and demand to effectively give price discovery and transparency options to customers. And nowhere is this more important than in South Africa, where I think it's worth mentioning that we are witnessing demand destruction at an unprecedented scale and staggering speed, where major energy intensive users are cutting back on their operations, with significant and sustained increases in electricity costs being one of the oft-cited grounds for these decisions to cut back on operations. The wholesale market, of course, exists in part to address this, to create a platform where market forces are permitted to drive down prices and to award the efficient allocation of capital to the most effective generation options for each application in the generation stack. Importantly, it will also incentivize significant innovation, as we will see in some of the later slides. Now, it's also worth mentioning that market reform has become a global norm, where we are seeing wholesale liberalized markets operate in Europe, in the UK, in the US, Latin America, and across Asia. Even in Africa, on our own continent, a number of markets are moving toward liberalized environments such as Nigeria, Kenya, Morocco, and Tanzania. Now, it's imperative that South Africa cannot fall behind. In fact, in doing some research for this presentation, I realized an interesting data point that more than 80% of the G20 countries have significantly reformed electricity supply sector, which I think points to the correlation between a stable electricity supply sector, liberalized and permitting the open and competitive procurement of renewable energy as one of the key underpins to effective economic growth. I think this reform, of course, cannot take place in a vacuum. It exists rather as the result of multiple considered and intentional steps, which have culminated in the adoption and substantive promulgation of the Electricity Regulation Act in January of this year. And this act, of course, is the empowering legislation that underpins the entire electricity supply sector and informs the manner in which national reform agenda, cabinet-approved policy, and associated legislative interventions are developed and implemented in the country. Now, given the history of power generation, transmission, and distribution in South Africa, much of this infrastructure establishment burden has fallen on the fiscus. However, SAWEM and its accompanying mechanisms provide a vital catalyst for price discovery, and if properly implemented through a empowered and capacitated regulator, have the potential to stimulate significant investment into all sectors of the energy value chain, driving associated economic growth, innovation, and job creation as direct consequences of these investments. Now, of course, as we've seen in the media, as well as at many instances, these types of change are often very uncomfortable and come with significant and robust debate. But NOAA is, along with the rest of the trading ecosystem, committed to shaping the transition in line with these approved policy positions. But what does this all mean for the customers and the generators who are going to be participants in the wholesale energy market? Today, as we've heard from some of the other speakers, customers are primarily constrained to purchasing renewable energy through either an embedded solution, where a generation source is established behind the meter, or via wheeling, a mechanism of financial reconciliation where energy is generated and then offset against a customer's consumption and reflected as a rebate on their invoice from the network service provider. Now, in a mature wholesale market, customers will be afforded significant choice, but with great power comes great responsibility. And we do believe that the election to become a market participant comes with significant obligations on both the generation and the offtake side of the spectrum. Now, generators, as Bronwyn has covered in some detail, will be balanced responsible parties if they meet certain thresholds, and will be required to forecast generation and dispatch schedules based on the market requirements and into the day-ahead market, suffering certain consequences if their forecasts are insufficiently accurate. Of course, generators are typically housed in ring-fenced special purpose vehicles that own the assets of the generation facility, and these are not necessarily capacitated to handle the complexities of forecasting production, monitoring weather patterns, and reconciling the overs and unders of their balancing obligations which flow from SAWEM, nor managing these risks on behalf of their end customers. Now, herein lies one of the principal value propositions of a trader like NOAA, because by understanding the supply and demand patterns across a diversified fleet of generation facilities and a diversified portfolio of customers, traders are ideally positioned from a data perspective to understand the risks attendant upon participating in SAWEM and to operate as that risk management buffer on both sides of the equation. So how do we do this? Well, NOAA is investing in some of the most technologically advanced forecasting and data capabilities by using real-time metering and telemetry to understand customer demand and generator production at the required resolution that the market dictates, being hourly reconciliation and settlement. We are developing, and I'll touch on this in a subsequent slide, an energy trading system that allows us to schedule, to allocate, and to reconcile energy allocations that are issued to customers. As I've mentioned already, by aggregating wind, solar, and storage, we're able to smooth out that generation profile and thereby mitigate risk to both customers and generators. We see significant advances that are taking place in respect of the flexibility of PPAs, both off-market PPAs that we will enter into ahead of the market, but also non-physical PPAs, such as contracts for difference and hedging mechanisms that Olga touched on in the previous presentation. One of the key interventions that we are establishing is developing a deep understanding and integration with customers and their demand profile. You can imagine that if you're a smelter that is planning to take a single smelter offline, you want to be letting your energy service provider know that this shift in your demand profile is taking place, so that you can mitigate against the rest of the portfolio that may be able to absorb that energy demand reduction. But it is only through this deep integration that one is able to achieve this. I think the next topic that we are investing a significant amount of time and resources in is understanding the importance and deployment of grid-forming storage assets. So I mentioned our 506 megawatt Gauteng cluster that will have grid-forming storage deployed when it reaches commercial operations date, allowing us to respond to those price signals that are implicit in the market. I think the final thing that I would mention on this slide is deep investment in global and local expertise. So just like Cresco, surely Solvaldi also participates in the NOAA business, but we are also looking further abroad to global markets who have been through these learnings and lessons already, and importing some of that talent to help us prepare for some of the vagaries and complexities attendant on this market. To touch briefly on our proprietary energy trading platform, I think it's important to note here that on the far left-hand side of the picture, we can see the integration into our data management layer, which pulls information both from the generation facility as well as the consumption on the off-taker's side, provides necessary forecasts from both the generation fleet and the consumption fleet, and analyzes this in an advanced analytics layer to optimize the ideal allocation of energy and to manage the risks of balance responsible forecasting and dispatch schedules before that allocation is effectively made via our energy trading system. These allocations then are reconciled with the network service provider, and invoices are generated via the accounting layer in the third step of the platform to be issued to the customers. Reconciliations and payments are then also absorbed through the energy trading system, which allows us to achieve the necessary collections from customers, make payments to generators, and such that the generating fleet can then service its commercial lending requirements. I think the final note that I would leave the audience with is that the SAWEM is only a catalyst if it is effectively capacitated, and if the entire system is in a place where we have reformed collectively to enable this transparency, the liquidity, and the efficiency of capital deployment that SAWEM makes possible. I think this includes lenders, it includes customers, it includes NERSA, but in particular, it includes the rapid unbundling and independence of the transmission service operator without being fettered by the leasebacks of assets from the holding company or being subject to, as we've seen forecasted by the Cresco presentation, excessive fixed cost tariff composition, which will serve to stifle the innovation that is made possible by mechanisms such as SAWEM. And I think it is only against the strong and well-functioning electricity supply sector that the necessary social impacts can be achieved, and thereby ensure that all of South Africa is able to achieve energy security. Because at NOAA, we're investing in ensuring that we're operationally ready to handle the rigors of an open and competitive marketplace, and are adopting the necessary technology, systems, and contracting guardrails to ensure that we are able to be the energy partner of choice to our commercial and industrial energy users, and are able to deliver on the bright promise of tomorrow's future. Thanks very much, Chris. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Andrew. And we've seen here a really interesting group of presenters, one from the perspective of a generator, that was the solar group, one from the perspective of a trader, which was Andrew Taylor from NOAA, and one from the perspective of large off-takers. And it's really interesting to see how these different players are preparing for this wholesale electricity market in South Africa through a whole range of activities and initiatives, from basic training through to high technology software solutions that Andrew has spoken about. So thank you, Andrew, for an excellent presentation, which I really appreciated. And now we're going to have a perspective from a legal perspective, shall I say. And with that, I'd like to introduce our last presenter, and that is Jason van der Poel from Webber Wentzel. Jason has expertise in all aspects of project development and finance. He's advised lenders, sponsors, and contractors on limited recourse project financing, public-private partnerships, government support, partnerships and joint ventures, construction and operations contracts, power purchase agreements, procurements, syndicated and term loans, bond issues and securitizations. And Jason's practice at Webber Wentzel has a focus on transactional and regulatory aspects of renewable energy IPP procurements. He has a Bachelor of Laws in Banking and Finance from the University College of London and a Bachelor of Laws and Bachelor of Business Science degrees from UCT. And he's an admitted attorney of the High Court of South Africa, well experienced in this field and in the electricity market reform that is underway. So we're really looking forward to your view, Jason, giving us a perspective from the legalities and legal issues that are facing participants in this electricity market. Over to you, Jason.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you very much to my esteemed panelists and also to all of the audience who are attending today. Today, I will be speaking to the legal aspects of preparation for the implementation of the South African wholesale electricity market. I'll speak to why SAWEM is important legally, what we know about the roadmap to the launch of the South African wholesale electricity market, SAWEM, on the 1st of April, 2026. I'll speak to key legal topics surrounding the market code and the South African wholesale electricity market. I'll then talk about what we are seeing in our daily work for IPP clients, off-takers, traders, and lenders in the private bilateral market, not so much for government in my direct area of practice. And then finally, I have a set of recommendations from a legal perspective regarding the path ahead for SAWEM. In preparation for this presentation, I spoke with some IPP clients, traders, lenders, also with Keith, Hans, Olga, Bronwyn, and Andrew, my co-panelists. And I think there are several themes that we understand commonly. So with that, I'll jump into the question of why SAWEM is important. You will all recall that on the 1st of January, quite importantly and seismically in our market, the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act came into effect following a lot of stakeholder engagement and multiple iterations and debates. This Amendment Act ushers the South African electricity sector into an era of change, continuing the shift from Eskom's historically vertically integrated monopoly to the establishment of a transmission system operator and the introduction of SAWEM as an open market platform that enables competitive trading of electricity. This is important because this aims to foster competitive pricing and investment in our market, promote innovation and modernization, reduce reliance on the national treasury, as was the case in all of our government procurements with the government guarantee in the implementation agreement in REAP, risk mitigation, battery storage, etc., and enhance energy security in South Africa. And finally, the final aim of SAWEM is to enable transparent and fair cost distribution. The launch of SAWEM is currently scheduled to occur on the 1st of April 2026, which is quite close and quite a daunting task for the market and the many people who are working very hard to make this happen. This sets up a very aggressive timeline for a series of key activities to occur. And we heard Keith speaking about the number of activities that the NTCSA is taking responsibility for at this stage. The first being the approval by NERSA of NTCSA's market operator license. A public hearing for this, for the application, will be hosted by NERSA on the 30th of September 2025. So that's quite soon. Second, the issue into the market by NERSA of the final market code. Draft 2 of the market code was published in July 2025, and in my view, it's in really good shape. But we will need some additional rules to fill out the detail of the principles expressed in the market code. The issuance of the market code is scheduled to take place sometime before the end of December 2025. Keith spoke to the development of systems platforms for SAWEM, He also spoke about the running of the SAWEM market school by the NTCSA, which I understand has gone very, very successfully so far. And the next running of it is meant to be from the 16th to the 18th of September, unfortunately all sold out. And I think Keith is planning for further sessions. Then the development of agreements for documenting balance responsibilities and market participation. These are to be published and workshopped before governance approval can be obtained for these agreements and before they go into effect. And this process should be completed by January 2026. And then finally, a very important topic is vesting contracts. These are the contracts between Eskom Generation and the Central Purchasing Agency of the NTCSA. And these contracts must be, they have been drafted. They've been in existence for a couple of years, although they've not been made publicly available. And these would also need to be workshopped and finally approved by government and by NERSA, all of which will then lead up to the launch of the South African wholesale electricity market on the 1st of April, 2026. There are a number of key legal topics surrounding the market code and SAWEM that I'd like to draw attention to, many of which were highlighted by James McKay of Energy Council in a very important seminar that was held during African Energy Forum in June this year. And so I have leaned quite heavily on James and Energy Council's guidance on this, and I won't go through all of the legal aspects that I've listed on these slides, but you'll have these as a resource. But the ones that I would like to speak about, I've highlighted here. The first is the finalization of Eskom's unbundling and the setting up of the transmission system operator as envisaged in the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act. This needs to be finalized, and right now the NTCSA is still a wholly owned subsidiary of Eskom. Eskom's litigation against the traders, the new traders, despite the minister's instructions to the contrary, is ongoing, is a very important topic because it is a bellwether as to how Eskom Generation is thinking about the South African wholesale electricity market. And that's a space of keen legal interest for everyone in the industry. A second extremely important topic is the unbundling of the network charges. Olga went into great detail about this, but there is a need for a new framework on unbundled transmission and distribution charges, and pass-through is required, and achieving the right balance is extremely important. We'll touch on that a bit later. Further, there is a need for the alignment of codes and laws. Andrew had a slide setting out all of the different regulations and codes and rules underneath the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act, and all of these are going to need to speak together to achieve SAWEM. Also importantly is the creation of a framework for the Central Purchasing Agency, its role, its pricing methodology, its license, and then how the pricing is to be passed through. It will be the primary interface with Eskom Generation for purposes of vesting contracts, and also the primary interface with the market for legacy contracts. Those are the ones that were procured through REAP and risk mitigation and battery storage, those IPP procurement programs. And CPA, the CPA will interface between them and the market. Then there are a number of contractual transitional impacts arising from the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act and the market code on power purchase agreements, electricity supply agreements, and connection and use of system agreements that will need to be taken into account. There is change in law risk through all of this market reform. And so parties to long-term bilateral contracts will need to think very carefully about the impacts of SAWEM on their business. And I'll unpack that a bit further in a moment. We'll need to find out the form of the Balanced Responsible Parties Agreement and also the form of the Market Participant Agreement. There are a couple of other legal issues which I won't go into much detail on, but the establishment of governance structures under the market code needs to happen before SAWEM can take flight. There's a need for a regulatory framework on retail thresholds and municipal retailer roles. Municipal participation, I see that there were some comments in the chat in this webinar around how municipalities will engage with SAWEM. and there is a need for further regulation of this. We heard earlier from multiple of our speakers that any generator of electricity that generates above 10 megawatts of electricity will need to be a balanced responsible party under the market code. And there will need to be a legal mechanism to compel grid-connected IPPs above this threshold to register as balanced responsible parties and comply with balancing rules. This will need to be fleshed out also before SAWEM occurs. We've spoken about market participation and balancing contracts, and something for a little further down the track is how contracts for difference will be documented, whether these will be done in the form of ISDA standard form contracts, as is normally the case in derivatives markets, or whether it'll be more akin to the style of the European Federation of Electricity Traders, which has a separate form. So just to turn to what I'm seeing in practice, sitting behind my desk here in Sandton at Webber Wentzel, in my practice, many of our clients have entered into or are entering into private bilateral contracts. These are long-term power purchase or power purchase and storage agreements or electricity supply agreements between IPPs, traders, and or off-takers. We know that the South African wholesale electricity market allows existing bilateral contracts to continue to exist aside from the market. So these parties are not forced to participate in the market under the current rules, and at least in the beginning, they will remain external to the market. We also know that PPAs between independent power producers and Eskom under the formal government procurement programs, like REAP risk mitigation and the battery storage program, will transact within the market through the central purchasing agency as what is defined as legacy contracts, for which rules still need to be defined. It'll be mandatory for generators greater than 10 megawatts to register as BRPs, as I mentioned earlier. Off-takers staying outside the market will not carry balancing obligations. So that's of relief to some of the off-taker clients. And then the South African wholesale electricity market will introduce new cost-reflective tariffs. As Olga unpacked in her presentation, the system marginal price, the SMP, use of system charges, and legacy charges. Looking forward at SAWEM, the private long-term bilateral agreements that I've referred to will need revision in a number of key ways. First is the insertion of provisions to regulate who will be a balanced responsible party and what they need to do, who will carry forecasting risk and balancing risk. They'll need to cater in the PPA and the financing agreements for reserving, for forecasting penalties, to the extent that the day-ahead forecasts are incorrect by a certain margin. They'll also need to be amended to address potential new costs arising from the tariff unbundling. They will also need to enable partial market participation, for example, the trading in the market in SAWEM of excess energy that is not taken up in the private bilateral agreements for the purchase of electricity. And then finally, change in law will need to be managed in a more nuanced way than simply making provision for a tariff increase to cover for the increased costs of the seller of the electricity. In our work for a number of clients, we are simply not seeing these amendments taking place in these private bilateral agreements to cater for these elements inherent to the market code. In newer private bilateral agreements that we are seeing, we are drafting market liberalization clauses or market reform clauses, which are an extension to the change in law clause. So instead of simply providing for a tariff adjustment for increased seller costs, so inevitably a tariff increase that is then the responsibility of the off-taker to pay, we're seeing market reform clauses which are more nuanced and allow the parties to come together to relook at their off-take agreements more holistically, taking into account the new rules that have come in, and to make changes that are necessary to preserve the commercial intention or the overall economic position of each party to the agreement. So that's the extent of what we've been seeing changing in these agreements. And so that begs the question, why are we not seeing more things changing in these existing private bilateral contracts at this stage? And the answer is it's because of regulatory certainty and the need for certainty in a number of key areas. I've listed here 4 key areas of a regulatory uncertainty that need to be made clear. The first is vesting contracts. What will the tariff unbundling of the vested contracts be? So those contracts between Eskom Generation and the market. We know that Eskom Generation wants the fixed component of the wholesale tariff to be quite a high proportion, around 80% of their tariff. And if the fixed component of the tariff is too high, this will compromise the participation in the market by private participants. This is something that Olga unpacked in greater detail. Second of all, balance responsibilities will need to be made clearer. Penalties and liabilities will need to be made clearer for forecast penalties and imbalanced liabilities. And then finally, again, Eskom's role, litigation against the traders is not encouraging to the market. Will Eskom prevail in its challenge of the award by NERSA of the latest round of trading licenses? We don't think so. What will the new trading rules that are under consultation now look like? How soon will Eskom's unbundling occur, the creation of a separated transmission system operator, and what will Eskom Generation's stance be on the South African wholesale electricity market? I think these are very important questions for our client base. So finally, just to close off, a couple of recommendations from a legal perspective regarding the path to SAWEM that lies ahead. IPPs, traders, off-takers, and lenders in the market won't know the answers to a number of the questions that I've raised in this presentation and that exist. We know that Keith at NTCSA, Hans, James at Energy Council, Niveshan, Boitumelo, and others at SAWEM, and squadrons of others are working very hard to bring about this certainty that is sought, and to navigate us to a successful launch of SAWEM, which we've established is extremely important for our overall country's well-being. Energy Council has recommended a staggered approach to the launch of SAWEM with an initial phase involving only Eskom Generation and the market. So potentially we could see a launch of SAWEM without private participation for some time. That's one possibility, which seems logical to me. We would also recommend a focus on bringing about regulatory certainty in the areas that I've listed on this slide: the unbundling of Eskom, the creation of the TSO, the formation of the form of the vesting contracts, the legacy contracts and their tariff structure, the unbundling of the wholesale electricity tariffs and the proportion of fixed to variable charges, the granular content of balance responsibility rules, the quantum of forecast penalties and imbalance penalties, the contractual mechanisms involved in becoming a market participant, and finally, the creation of clear rules by NERSA, leveraging its Electricity Market Advisory Forum, which is a new institution, hopefully geared at helping NERSA, capacitating NERSA to make these complex of rules that are required for the smooth functioning of SAWEM. Once these things have been done, in my view, IPPs, traders, off-takers, and lenders will gain confidence to invest and participate in the South African wholesale electricity market. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. And over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Jason, for an exceptional presentation, very clearly articulated, listing the issues and the recommendations going forward from a legal perspective. It's really been a pleasure to have you on board as a very well-informed expert active in this field. And I hope that all the parties will be taking note of the recommendations and requirements for this to be successful. Having said that, I'm now going to introduce to you our expert, Hans Harold Bredesen from Bredesen Consulting, who will wrap up what he's heard today, providing some key takeaways, from what he's heard, as well as giving some of his own insights, on the way forward. Hans has been very deeply involved in the whole design of the South African wholesale electricity market, together with Keith Bowen at NTCSA. He's also got widespread experience around the world in this field. And he's also been heavily involved, as everybody knows, I think, who's participated in numerous webinars that have taken, numerous workshops that have taken place in the lead up to the development of the market code. Hans, it's great to have you here. Hans Harold Bredesen was involved in developing the first market systems at Nord Pool in Norway, and has since had over 25 years of international experience in the design and implementation of power markets and trading arrangements, as well as in developing new product offerings in evolving electricity markets. He has developed detailed national and regional power market strategies for regulators, power exchanges, and system operators in more than 20 countries and regions worldwide. Hans Harold is the CEO of Bredesen Consulting, and he's an associate of Nord Pool Consulting, where he was recently the CEO. He is a board member of NODES, that's N-O-D-E-S, the European Marketplace for Trading of Local Flexibility, as well as the International Center for Hydropower. So I can't think of a better person to wrap up and give these insights. And it's great to have you here, Hans Harold. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you. And it's always a pleasure to be here and talk about market reforms. And again, I have to correct you. Unfortunately, kind of, it's I now have more than 30 years experience in this, so I'm getting grown up in the field. But again, I'm really happy to see that so many people are attending. This interest that we see in SAWEM shows that essentially the power sector and the industry in South Africa is gearing up for the market launch. So today I'll do something a bit scary for a consultant. I will actually talk without PowerPoint slides, trying to summarize what we have heard during the seminar. So we heard the overview from Keith and the NTCSA on the progress and tasks leading towards the launch in April next year. I think, as we all understand, kind of it's a big task and it's a complex task. But again, as being part of this, I think, or I'm certain that the NTCSA and the market operator will be ready. So the key point is to bring everybody along. I think we also have, we have also been listening to the view of the opportunities and risks for IPPs, market participants. We heard from Sola and NOAA focusing kind of on both, let's say, the BRP and market participant perspective on this. We heard legal and more the legal and the market consultants from Cresco and Weber Wenzel talking about kind of their view on this. And I think commonly their views express the feeling that I also feel from the people I meet as part of this process, and that everybody understands the requirement of the effort that is required to put into understanding the reform and the new markets. And we see huge engagement, and as kind of expressed both by Keith and also others, a clear kind of statement of this is the massively, to be honest, oversubscription for the market school shows kind of the interest from people in the industry. So it, in a sense, it highlights the complexity of the reform, but also, as we heard, and I like the statement from Andrew saying that it is also important that South Africa cannot afford to fall behind and leave kind of this third attempt to do a market reform. So to refer on how maybe my kids would say it, and with kind of a smile and also showing my own age, it feels like kind of all the market participants are a bit FOMO, so fear of missing out here. And I think this expresses the potential benefit of SAWEM that people see, but also at the same time that this is a new topic where there are uncertainties. As Chris also said, I've been lucky to support the development of the market code, been part of the consultation processes through the workshops, as well as being one of the speakers at the market school. So you can say that I might be a bit biased, but again, as said by Chris in the introduction, I have some experience from being in similar processes before. So all the way back from the start in Norway, actually now 32 years ago, through more than 30 other international reforms, leading up to kind of this last one, if I can say. Hopefully it's not the last, but at least the most current one. I feel that I have some experience from similar processes, and again, I can see and feel some of the same, let's say, processes that are emerging with regards to the reform. So I will not go into any details, as kind of the previous speakers have done an excellent job in presenting, let's say, both the potential, the risk, and the requirements for a successful launch of the SAWEM, which I think, again, when you see kind of the level of detail and understanding expressed by the previous speakers, it's almost like you can say that this provides the confidence that the work that has been done leading up to the launch is good, because when we see kind of the level of detail and the work that has been put into this from the stakeholders, shows that the market is well funded, and the understanding by market participants is growing. So I would rather focus on, let's say, the big picture and the reform, let's say, process itself. And as many of you have heard before, and I very often started my South African presentations by saying that South Africa is not that special, even though that you think you are special. But I have to say, at the same time, you are special. And what I mean by this statement is that, again, no market reform has ever been easy. So in that sense, you're not special. It's always a lot of issues and a lot of things that need to be resolved. And again, there has never been kind of a simple market reform. But the second part is also important in the sense that we need to ensure that the market reform for South Africa fits the South African situation. So in that sense, you are special. And I think, and to the compliment to the NTCSA team on the market, and all the effort that has been put into this, I strongly believe that the market design and the market code that has been put in place is capturing kind of the specific cases for South Africa, and I will also supporting a bit both the department and the NTCSA on also looking at how to ensure that some of the pitfalls that we've seen in other market reforms won't happen for South Africa. But again, when implementing a reform, it can be sometimes overwhelming. There are a lot of tasks that needs to be done, and of course, we all want to all of them to be solved to perfection. But again, as I can say, at least I have never seen a perfect market reform, so I don't think that exists. So independent on how we can design and plan as careful as possible, but ultimately it's also a time where you have to take the leap of faith and launch the market. And as I did lecture last week, and we had some very interesting discussions with my students, it's easy to point out things both within and outside the reform process that needs to be fixed to make this work. And surely there are also issues in South Africa that requires attention. But again, I will again reiterate that the perfect timing for a market opening doesn't exist. So one of my key mantras in market opening is that, first of all, and I think we also heard that this is supported by the Energy Council, is that do things stepwise. So again, try to open the market and see the effects of it, but don't jeopardize any of the the players in the market. And a nice slogan that we developed some time ago is kind of do the market reform as an evolution, not a revolution. So again, take the careful steps forward and assess the effect of it. Just as an example, again, we just finished our election in Norway yesterday, actually. And again, in Norway, the discussion on market and how the energy and electricity market shall work is still high on the agenda of our discussions. You might think that after 32 years of operation of our market, that this is seen to be stable. However, the continuous evolution of the markets, impacts from policy changes, new technologies, as well as other issues, makes the market being under continuous change. So as I've said many times, a market reform needs to be not seen as a project, but rather a process. And it's actually better to get this going. Therefore, I strongly support a market opening, and maybe, as we heard from the Energy Council, that maybe from the outset it will be ESCOM generation distribution and then the CPA participating. Because I think what is missing, and I see that from the discussions in the market school and in other forums, is that what is lacking is the visibility of a reference price or a market price. And with the launch of the market with these three players, we'll actually create a transparent market price that will cover, let's say, in the size of 90% of the underlying demand of South Africa. And I've seen that because I've been part of market reforms before, where the incumbent has been forced into the market based on a regulated arrangement. But we also saw in this same market that as soon as day one, the market price was shown, on day two, we saw direct reactions from other market participants on the prices. And I'm confident that the same will happen in South Africa. As soon as we see transparent market prices, the industry will start reacting. And to finish this off, I would like to focus on the future market participants and the stakeholders. Because as humans, we are not really fond of changes. However, in a situation like this, you can look at the glass half empty or half full. A change to reform always brings opportunities as well as risk. But I would urge people to look at the glass half full and seek the opportunities that are open to you. And the same important statement is regarding ESCOM. Because history has shown that through market reforms, the old incumbent, if embracing the change, can also evolve with the market reform and provide a place in the sun, let's say, in the market. So I hope and believe ESCOM should look at this in the same way. And to finish this off, I'll like to recite two statements that fit the situation of South Africa. So first of all, this is remembering my old friend, late friend, Musara Beta from Southern African Power Pool. When we were launching or planning the launch of the new market in SAP and having the same kind of discussions when the right time for the market opening, he said, when you want to learn to swim, you can read all the books, you can watch all the videos, you can participate in all the training sessions, but at some point you need to get wet and jump into the pool. However, maybe not in the deep end, but rather in the child's end. And I think this is a good picture of how we shall look at the opening of the market. And maybe to finish off with a less serious note, even though it's not Friday yet, but to support the launch, waiting for a perfect situation, I would like to remind you of the famous sign in many Irish bars, free beer tomorrow. But of course, that doesn't change when you come into the bar the next day. So I think we shall support the NTCSA on the launch and try to make this market happen on April 1st next year. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hans Aron, for some very, very wise words. And it does give me great comfort to know that a person as experienced as you has been so deeply involved in the design of the South African electricity market, bringing years and years of experience. You know, we've got a lot to learn from by being perhaps a later participant in this reform process. We've got a wealth of experience that you've brought to the table, and experiences that have happened around the world in this reform process. And in a way, that gives me great comfort to know that people like you are involved, people like Keith are involved. I know how much work you have put into this, and Keith and his team have put into it. And I agree with you that I think we are kind of ready. We will never be 100% ready, and we have to jump into the pool in the shallow end to start with. I thought that analogy just summed it up beautifully. So thanks, Hans Arnold, for those words. We will take them to heart, I'm sure. The recording of this webinar will be available to everybody, and your words will be considered carefully, I hope. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the presentations and the start of the Q&A session. We have about half an hour at our disposal for this. And I thought maybe we should start this. I can see here that there are 47 questions that have been posed and answered on the Q&A chat facility. There are a further 20 questions still open, and I hope that our presenters will help me in answering some of those in text form, because we're not going to be able to deal with them one by one. But I'd like to kick off, if I can find the question. I'm just scrolling through. Yeah, it's a question that was put about the role of municipalities and how they are able to, how much they'll be able to participate in the South African wholesale electricity market, bearing in mind their deep dysfunctionality, the credit risks, etc. So there have been some questions about municipalities and how they participate in SAWEM. And I see a comment and a question by Dr. Grubia Steyn of Meridian Economics, who says the key questions are not so much how municipalities can participate in SAWEM, but rather how customers located inside municipal supply areas can participate. So question, how can these customers within municipal networks, how can they participate? And I do know that Meridian have done some work on token wheeling. And how does this fit in, Javier, to the situation? That's what I think is on my mind. But I'd like to maybe pose this question to, let's just say, let's start off with Andrew Taylor, who is a trader, who is not allowed yet to use the Eskom virtual wheeling product or platform. How do you see municipalities participating, and how do you see off-takers within municipalities participating in the South African wholesale market? Andrew.
Yeah, so Chris, I think that's a very valid question, and unfortunately not one that we have a very cogent answer for at this point, given that, as you've pointed out, virtual wheeling was intended to be one of the mechanisms which would allow for municipal wheeling. But at present, traders are not permitted to engage in virtual wheeling with off-takers. And I think it's another area where both capacitation of municipalities has shown up in rather an alarming environment, given that high quality offtake is within municipal boundaries, simply because the municipality is in arrears or the wheeling frameworks on a traditional basis have not permitted wheeling, are entirely excluded from their ability to procure renewable energy. So this is absolutely one of those areas that I think significant attention from the likes of the Energy Council as well as Eskom to facilitate the necessary conversations at the right levels is required in order to move this roadblock out of the way, because we cannot, in moving towards a liberalized market, leave behind fully north of 45% of the market.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And just a follow up on this, and I think perhaps the best person to direct this to is Jason, to give us an idea on the legalities and where things stand. Yeah, we heard today that, well, we have read that that Eskom is challenging trading licenses. We've heard that the minister has recommended to Eskom that they should drop this legal challenge and to engage with NERSA, as another government sort of body, offline and not through the courts. We've also seen the minister expedite the rules, the production of the trading rules, and I'm just asking for your insight. I know you maybe cannot give an answer, but do you think that Eskom is going to, heed the words of the minister and deal with NERSA, offline, especially since NERSA has agreed to produce these rules within 3 to 6 months, I understand it. And it seems strange to agree with the minister. It seems strange, that they should be litigating in court when there are solutions in progress. And that maybe they should negotiate offline and deal with things, in a less confrontational manner. But where do you think things stand, and where are things going? What are the two options that you see playing out here, the two extremes, and where do you think the middle road is?
Chris, that is an incredibly difficult question you've asked me. And I would say, what I can say is that our firm is representing a participant in that litigation, one of the traders. And so we are in that fight, and we stand by our client, obviously, in that fight. I also would like to really praise the minister for being as vocal and strident as he has been, for consistent with all of the messaging around South African policy, the liberalization of the market, the need for that liberalization, the decrease of reliance on South African government guarantees for purposes of our electricity generation and transmission development in the country. I thought he was very courageous in saying very publicly that he opposed the litigation. I cannot speak to what Eskom is going to do. All I can hope is that Eskom will embrace the South African wholesale electricity market and do what it can to facilitate this liberalization, this reform of our electricity market, because without it, the consequences are quite dire. I think I should leave it there.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jason. And maybe this question could be put to Keith, if you're there, Keith. I don't see your picture. Oh, you are there. Thank you. I do see your picture now. Keith, a question here from Nflonshla Soroke, who asks, how will balancing responsibility be allocated amongst market participants? And what is the state of registration of these balancing responsible parties and the contractual arrangements with them? We've heard that anyone above 10 megawatts will be required to be registered and to become a responsible party. Yeah, and we've also heard that off-takers don't have this balancing responsibility. So it's the generators we're talking about. But can you give us an idea of how this balancing responsibility is allocated amongst the generators?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is just to go back to the ERA. And the ERA amendment says that balance responsibility is with generators, traders, and distributors, and not with customers. So customers, the way we see it, the customers will not be balance responsible unless they become market participants. So the idea is, and again, that those criteria will be established by NERSA. We've proposed criteria for balance responsibility. We've said we think certain thresholds need to be kind of achieved in order to become balance responsible, and we've specified 10 megawatt as the threshold for generators. NERSA may decide something else, but that's what we've proposed as the threshold. So it means that if a generator greater than 10 megawatts is not a market participant, they're still balance responsible. They would have to give a forecast of what they're going to produce, and if they do something different, they're exposed to the balancing price. Obviously, if you're a market participant, that's then a different thing, because now you're able to participate in the market and you can go through the intraday to adjust your positions so that the risk is minimized for those balanced responsible parties. But the idea of allocation is not really kind of, everybody who's a market participant is by default balance responsible. They have to be, to take responsibility for the positions that they've taken, both in the day ahead and in the intraday. Outside the market, we have balance responsibility assigned by NERSA as per the ERA, and that would then be kind of those that are then required to be balance responsible would be decided. So that could well be one of the things that the trading rules is trying to deal with, the fact that the allocation for that, or the rules for that, need to be established by NERSA to give effect for balance responsibility in the market.
Thank you very much, Keith. And maybe I can pose this one to you, Olga. How can large energy intensive customers, particularly smelters, participate in the market through their flexibility of their demand, their ability to generate negawatts, negative power by reducing demand? How do they participate in SAWEM? If you could assist us there, Olga.
So like everyone, they would need to become market participants, and that would then allow them to basically adjust. So just like generators can adjust their generation demand, can have a demand response capabilities. So that would then allow them to respond to the instructions of the system operator and provide the necessary flexibility to the grid should the need arise, and they will be remunerated for this service.
Thank you. This one to you, Bronwyn. A question really from me, and that is, can you explain to me, well, an off-taker to you as a generator, are they, we have the regulated market, the regulated price arrangements. We have these bilateral contracts that I understand will be allowed to continue, and we have the market. Does a generator or an off-taker have to decide, are they in the regulated area only? Are they in the market area only, or are they in bilateral contracts only, or can they be in both? Can a customer, for example, an off-taker, have part of its electricity supply, under regulated prices, and part of its electricity supply, by participating in the market, and part of its electricity supply, through bilateral contracts, or do they have to choose one of these mechanisms? And if they can't participate, in multiple mechanisms, why not? What's the reasoning behind it? Does it make sense?
It does. Thank you. And as Jason said, you like to ask the hard questions, so thanks for posing that to me. From an IPP's perspective, I'll actually use what Hans does in his presentation on the bilateral contracts being allowed to continue outside of SAWEM. Across other markets, long-term bilateral contracts continue. They tend to be CFDs, or contracts for difference, but it allows participants to have stable and certain pricing over the long term. So that will likely to continue. And as a customer, it probably makes sense to consider long-term contracts as well as being able to trade in the market. The decision for, I think it might have been one of my other participants who spoke, it was Olga who was speaking about the smelter. If you choose to be a market participant as an off-taker, you then have to be governed by the market participation rules. And that allows for you to choose who your supplier of energy is going to be. So you can have long-term contracts, you can go into the market and buy and sell as you choose. And then as a generator, we would have to make the decision about whether or not we want to do bilateral contracts, which we'll continue to do, the ability to trade in the market. And as I said, as a BRP, there are definitely opportunities for IPPs to be market participants, because it allows us to balance our positions. And then as we bring in flexible battery storage, like I mentioned, that allows us to then go into additional markets. So the balancing market, the ancillary services market, the capacity remuneration market. And if I've forgotten one, Keith, I'm sorry, I'll go back to the school. I think that was it.
Thanks, Keith. I don't know if you want to add anything to that in any way.
No, I think Bronwyn's covered it very well in terms of the fact that you can have contracts for differences that bring you back to a kind of hedged price outside the market, and it actually provides for a lot more certainty for consumers in terms of their future prices by directly contracting with a supplier than what they would do under the current regulated regime. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that. I also would like to touch on a question. It may have been answered in the text already, but Mike Barker asked a question about this NERSA Electricity Market Advisory Forum, which I think NERSA sort of called for nominations, to serve on this. Maybe I can address this one to Hans Arold. What is the role of this Electricity Market Advisory Forum, and where do things stand at the moment? Is it happening? Is there progress being made? Are appointments being made? And how are they made? And when will this advisory forum be effectively operational? Is this an ongoing thing forever, or is it just part of the transition, towards the launch of SAWEM?
I think you miss your target now, because I think I know exactly as much as you on this topic at the moment. The only thing I know that there has been a lot of activity of nominating people, because I know I've been asked to refer some people. But to talk more about in general, the need for this, and again, as you know, there is also a similar-ish, if I can call it, committee as part of the market code. It is important to have a structured process of managing let's say, requirements for change or modifications to whatever rule that you put in place. So, but again, I have no insight or no let's say view on the role of that actually.
Okay, thank you. Something I need to investigate a bit further on as to what is its role and its future, and how long it's intended to be mandated for. I'll certainly try and find out more about that. I see a question, from Greg Gow here, which also may have been answered on the text, but it's something that has been on my mind. And I'm wondering who I should pose this to. Keith, I have to come to you here on this one. But how on board are municipalities and the municipal electricity distribution industry and SALGA and AMEU and all these municipal structures? How on board are they on this market reform? Or are they being obstructive towards the market? Or is there, a mixed bag of players, some of them supportive and some of them not supportive? But can you just give us a feeling for the municipal sector, the electricity distribution industry sector, as market participants?
Yeah, so definitely, as I think you alluded to at the end there, not all municipalities are created equal. I mean, definitely we have a very different approach from some municipalities to others. I know there are some of the large metros are seriously gearing up to become market participants and are very interested in the process and very supportive of the process. In terms of SALGA and AMEU, we've had workshops with them in the past. Obviously, they will provide comment when this gets to NERSA and look at some of the issues that concern them. One of the comments we did receive, not in writing, but in the workshops that we had with them, was, for example, the need for market caps. And so we have retained a market cap as a mechanism, at least in the transition in the code. And there may be others. And I think some of the items that have been discussed, at least in the chat, dealing with the readiness of municipal structures to be able to deal with the code and even their customers being able to participate in the market, those are critical aspects that we would need to work through. But it definitely, I'm not seeing that there's any sort of major opposition to what's happening, but it's more about how do we deal with the municipalities that can participate and what are we doing for those that can't. So, I mean, the EDI reform roadmap has some fantastic views into kind of how we manage reform of municipalities and Eskom distribution in the future. And we would hope that we kind of work and align in terms of the development of the market as we move forward as well.
Thanks for that, Keith. And another question here from Matthew Kuhn, who says, what collateral, and I presume he's talking about financial collateral or level of creditworthiness or, will be required to become a balanced, responsible party and a market participant so that they can participate in the market? How onerous are these requirements, financial, strength of the company, of the participant to become a participant? Perhaps we can put that to Andrew Taylor. Andrew?
So, Chris, you've caught me put me on the spot here, and I've, like Bronwyn, also been through the SAWEM market school, but I think Keith's going to send me an email revoking my certificate if I can't answer this one. But I think the underpin here is effectively that in order to commit to participating in the market, we need to have sufficient certainty that from a financial perspective, the participants in the market can honor the obligations, whether those are balanced, responsible. And Keith, I'm not sure whether the final rand value has been committed or has been confirmed as yet. But I do know that from a principal perspective, the idea is that sufficient collateral is provided for the obligations that are undertaken based on the anticipated generation that's going to be put into the market, or if you're on the off-taker side, based on the balanced responsible obligations as far as consumption are concerned. But perhaps, Keith, you can give the more informed perspective.
Keith, would you come in here? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So the idea is that then, if someone is balance responsible, they don't put down collateral because, we can't require collateral for balance responsibility. But definitely as a market participant, particularly an off-taker, the expectation that there is either bank guarantee or cash up front. So, we're looking at the idea that we have escrow accounts established in the names of all market participants that they would be putting money into that we have access to. That they then can't withdraw until we allow them to withdraw it. And so the idea is that then off-takers specifically are putting in money there to be able to purchase on the day ahead and the intraday. To a large extent, generators would not need to unless they are purchasing on intraday, because then a generator that is committed or even not committed day ahead and ends up now having to consume would need to make sure that that money is there. But on the whole, generators are not required to have the cash in, but definitely off-takers would, so that we can make sure that we're covering that. In terms of the quantum, a lot depends then on the expected consumption by a particular participant, that they're making sure that they can top that up. And one of the big things is looking into the future for each of the participants, looking for themselves to say, well, what do they think they're going to be purchasing and at what price, and make sure that they can go and get a bank guarantee for that, or covering that in terms of cash on a sort of week by week basis, so that we're able to clear when it comes to the end of the month.
Thanks for that clarification as well, Keith. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask if there are any people that want to put their hands up, and I do see that there are, in fact, some hands up. So let us go to them to ask verbal questions. And I see the first one is Harvest Time. Dear, I hope I pronounced that right, Harvest Time. Your hand is up, and I'm going to allow you to talk. So please switch on your microphone and ask your question. Are you there, Harvest Time? If not, we'll move on to the next person with the hands up. Are you there? Okay, I see that he has not turned on his microphone, so perhaps he has left. So I'm going to go to Mr. Miton Patel. I hope I pronounced your name right, Miton. I'm allowing you to talk by switching on your microphone now. Please, can you switch on your mic? Yeah. Go ahead. I see your microphone is on, but we're not hearing you. Okay, look, some problem there. The microphone is on, but we can't hear anything. So I'm going to move on then to the third hands upper, and that is Vishani Nayaga, who's a guest, and allow you to talk. Please, can you switch on your microphone and speak? Seems like we're not having any joy with our hands uppers. I'm not sure why. So let us call an end to that and move on to a question that I've got here. In fact, two questions from a lady called Melissa, who is an intern journalist at Energize magazine. It's wonderful to have young journalists in the energy sector asking these kind of questions. And I'm going to just quickly read out your question. Number one, given the central role of accurate energy forecasting and robust metering in SAWEM, what specific challenges do you foresee for renewable energy IPPs ensuring compliance and competitiveness, particularly when integrating variable generation into market operations? I'm going to throw this at you, Bronwyn, seeing as you're an IPP. Does that question make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Thank you. So it's a good question and a hard one to answer. Just in brief, I see we're running out of time, but the requirements are for metering to meet all of the ESCOM standards. So that's one of the capabilities that need to be built. The monitoring systems such as SCADA or telecommunications and telemetry systems that Andrew mentioned as well need to, if not be in place, need to be put in place. And then, as mentioned, the forecasting capability with weather forecasting that then gets matched against actual generation and improved over time so that your forecasted generation becomes more and more accurate.
Thank you. And the last question from Melissa, the intern journalist from Energize magazine. I'm going to put this one to you, Olga, if I may, because it does concern off-takers. How will SAWEM's market rules and contracting framework impact large industrial and mining users in terms of balancing obligations and opportunities for flexible demand participation, such as demand response or virtual power plants? Does that question make sense to you, Olga?
Not necessarily, in a sense that, sorry.
I think you have to some extent already answered about industrial users and mining users participating in terms of flexible demand participation. So I think that answers that question. And then I think the first part of the question, the establishment of SAWEM, does this have to impact large users? Can they decide they don't want to be market participants? They don't want to be involved in any way. They just want to continue on their special pricing agreement that lasts for another 15 years or 10 years and to hell with the market.
No, definitely. That will be a choice everyone will have to make. Market participation is by no means a requirement. I mean, we will have to see the final decision by NERSA, but ultimately, as it stands right now, there is no requirement to participate in the market. So you can decide to go ahead with a retailer and procure your energy through a retailer, or you can become a market participant in your own right and then procure it from the wholesale energy market. If you have additional capabilities in terms of demand response or flexible generation, obviously that just creates additional revenue sources for you, potential revenue sources and the services that you can provide to the system operator in terms of the ancillary services and the reserves. So from that potential, it just creates additional value sources and revenue sources for you that definitely you need to be able to take advantage of.
Thanks very much, Olga. And Melissa, I hope that's answered your questions. I think it has very well, in fact, answered those questions. And ladies and gentlemen, we're slightly over time, 2 minutes over time. So I'm going to bring this webinar to a close now. And firstly, just thank those companies that have participated as presenters, have allowed their staff to spend some serious time preparing presentations. And in particular, I want to mention the National Transmission Company of South Africa, and Keith, who's given of his time so freely and also being so transparent along the whole process, not just now, but for the last year or so that he's been engaging on this. Thanks also to the Solar Group and to Bronwyn for the excellent presentation. Speaking as a generator and as an IPP, it really added a significant insight. To Olga and Cresco as sponsors and participants, thank you for your wonderful presentation. Speaking from the point of view of large industrial off-takers. To Noah Group and Andrew, fantastic, clear and articulate presentation. For the time that you put into it and giving us of this time. Finally, to Weber Wenzel and to Jason, wonderful to have legal people of such caliber, and again, extremely articulate and clear presentation with clear recommendations, on the way forward and what needs to be done from a legal perspective. And last but not least, to Hans-Harold Bredesen of Bredesen Consulting, your words of wisdom are extremely appreciated, and your participation in the design of the market and the market code, together with the NTC-SA people and Keith, as I mentioned before, it gives me great comfort to have such people of such expertise leading this process. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Keep your eyes open for our next webinars. We've got 4 in the wings. I am not in a position to announce them just yet, but they will be announced shortly. They all very topical and burning issues in the energy and electricity sector. And we expect to have the kind of turnout that we've had today. It's been a fantastic turnout. We maxed out at 1,000 participants, but I must tell you that people that could not get in should have got a link to the YouTube channel, to our YouTube channel, where they can watch the webinar as a viewer on YouTube, as opposed to a participant in the audience where they can ask questions. So I hope to think that we've covered all bases, and certainly tomorrow everybody who registered will receive a feedback report with links to download the presentations themselves and to view the video recording of the webinar. So I think we have in fact covered all bases. So thanks again to everybody, and goodbye, and have a great afternoon forward. Cheers.